The dramatically long intro. Gotta love it, Andy. How you
Never
doing,
gets
my
old.
man?
Never gets old. It never gets old. So how I feel about the Warriors all season. Just a dramatically long intro into whatever the hell is going to happen in the next few months.
No GM. Apparently a draft.
Still no GM.
It just keeps moving. Hey, we got a special guest, but before we get to it today, I wanted to throw this out there. So I know a segment of our listeners are A's fans just as I. I grew up going to the Coliseum. Honestly, first sporting event I ever went to was an A's game. Andy, you'll appreciate this. Guess who hit a foul ball at me at my first A's game? Actually, there's no way on earth. You're just gonna start.
Nick Swish. No, Nick Swisher's way after. I don't know.
Rookie year, California Angels, JT Snow.
Oh, wow. I will appreciate that. Wow.
So it's like it's first off, that just makes me old. But secondarily, yeah. So I can't go Tuesday to the reverse boycott game. And I'm a little sad I don't get to show my support. So I have 2 sets of tickets, and they're good tickets. Section 110. One of them are row 4, so you're gonna want those ones. And another one are still good seats there. I will be auctioning them off to the first listeners who contact us. Email lightyearspod@gmail.com. I'll send them over to you. 2 sets of 2 tickets. Happy to. I just want a packed house full of A's fans Tuesday night.
I'm not an A's fan, but that's awesome, man. People say we don't talk enough other sports outside of the Warriors and the Giants and Niners, and then we got the A's in there. Let's go. Come on.
Maybe if the Warriors were less drama, we could get to other sports. But that's
cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. 2 sets of great seats. Good stuff.
Awesome. Okay. Special guest. So we've kind of avoided talking about the new CBA, what it means for the Warriors. I don't know if we've avoided it because we just want to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist.
I did.
Or just because, we're kind of like that Michael Scott gif where it's like, explain this to me like I'm 5 years old. So who better to have on other than our guy, Danny LeRoux, Dunked On Pod, The Athletic, Real GM. Danny, where else are you these days? Did I hit it all?
That's most of it. I mean, I do the broadcast for League Pass, but we're in the playoffs now, so we're not doing the League Pass show. But yeah, everything's good. Everything's busy, but it's good, man. How are you guys?
Hanging in there. So I want to start here. So can you give us a breakdown of on a high, everyone's heard about the second apron and what that means, and everyone knows the Warriors and Clippers are the most over the cap of everyone in the league. So give us the high level overview of what this means for this offseason, next offseason, going forward. How bad of a situation are the Warriors in right now?
So it's interesting because my thought had been the way they were going to handle this was they were going to make it really expensive to go really deep into tax. They have these bans and they were just going to make the bans more expensive. And that was within their rights. And the owners and players did do that. But the part that's more interesting in this, that's really going to affect those 2 teams and also the next group of those teams who we don't know who they are just yet. Nuggets might be in it. We'll have to see. Because what they did is they actually made it harder for teams over that second apron to add new talent. And that's the part that I think is more relevant. So yeah, it's going to cost owners money. And we know some people are actually very cognizant of that. It's actually a little bit funny, but that big difference. And I think in terms of the second apron, there are a number of really interesting things that are going to kick in over the years. So the one that starts this year, the only big one for this year is teams that are that far over, so it's I think $17.5 million over the tax line. They don't get a taxpayer mid-level, and so that's what the Warriors used to sign Dante DiVincenzo last year. You could go through all these examples over the past. So that's gone, and for these kinds of teams, and sort of if you've ever talked about the hard cap before, for that was existing in a different place. If you use it, then you can't go over the second apron for any reason. So that's there. That's going on for the rest of it. There are a bunch of other big ones like the luxury tax, the repeater tax are going way up. That's kicking in later. And then the other one, the frozen pick is too hard to explain right now, but basically that doesn't start until 24-25 as well. So really for the Warriors for this year, it's just that they lose the taxpayer mid-level, and there's probably not much they can do to get it, But also, if we're speaking practically here, I mean, they could get somebody who would help them, but it's not going to transform the team necessarily. So it hurts, but it doesn't hurt that badly.
So it's really like you said 24, 25 is when like the clock starts on potentially losing future picks and it getting potentially really restrictive with trades and some of the moves you can make. So for all intents and purposes, if Joe Lacob's willing to eat the tax, which, we'll see, they have like 12 months to get themselves under the line where they want to be. Is that the best way to think of it?
I would think of it as 18. Because really the way the way the luxury tax usually works is because it doesn't count until the end of the year. So if you could be, you can't actually, but if you were 100 million over the tax and you traded 100 million in salaries, you would pay no tax. Like that's the way it works. So you can't really do that as a practical consideration, but you see teams duck the tax, or in this case, it's going to be starting to duck the double tax at different points in time. So that's really it. But the practical consideration, why you might want to say 12 or 14, is because as a practical matter, it's very hard. It's going to be a lot harder now to dump salary in season, because one of the things that changed is I don't have all the numbers on this, but they raised the floor. So what that means is teams aren't going to come into the season like the Pacers did, like the Spurs did, with like 30 million in space. And so that means that you don't have those trade partners in January to be like, hey, you want to take 10 million, 15 million of my guy and not send anything back. The Warriors haven't really done that, but that option's not going to be on the table as much anymore.
Do remember Sam Hinkie used to mess with that.
That is the Sam Hinkie move right there. Right?
The legendary move. The legend. Hey, so Danny, does that long term for the Warriors? So it sounds like they lose. They don't get the ability to sign a Dante DiVincenzo. Sam and I are assuming, I think most of us are assuming, he's not going to be back anyway. He's going to decline that player option. He's going to be gone anyway, so they can't resign him regardless. But long term, how does this affect them? Like, is this kind of I think what we're all assuming is a Jordan Poole pivot point at some point for the Warriors. How does this work for the next 4 or 5 years?
So it's interesting because I think that it's actually going to affect the Warriors less than a team like the Clippers or that next team, whether it's the Celtics or the Nuggets, because this Warriors team is going to get cheaper just because their players aren't going to be players for that much longer. Like, that's the practical consideration. Also, like, they could leave of their own accord. Like, we don't know what Draymond wants. We don't know what the Warriors want or anything like that. But the thing that I've been telling people, which is very counter what has been kind of murmuring through Warriors Twitter when I see it, is the thing that they would benefit, like, let's say they could trade Jordan Poole for nothing, which is, maybe it can happen, maybe it can't. The primary thing they benefit from there is saving Joe Lacob money. Now, you can value saving Joe Lacob money if you want, but it's not going to give the Warriors $30 million to spend on other guys. It's not going to give them all these other things. And the trade exceptions are going to get dicey in a little bit. So that kind of thing is going to be different too. So really, they do actually have more of a window here. And then the other big variable. So like for me, like if I'm thinking about the Warriors, there are three things that we're circling for the next 12, 18 months. One is Poole for obvious reasons, but the other two are actually more interesting. And that's Draymond. How much do you bring him back? How much does it cost? What's the duration? What's the annual value there? Because then that sets the terms. And then Clay, because Clay's contract, I'm looking at my sheet, $43.2 million for next year, but then nothing after that. And he might want a lot. He might want less. That's actually a more complicated negotiation probably than Draymond for a bunch of different reasons. And they can extend him now, but only if, the two sides can come to an agreement. And if I'm the Warriors, I'm saying, I could bring you back. We could commit to it now, but it's going to be at a discount. And if you don't want that, then we'll roll it into next year and see where things go.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. The Clay stuff will be. Anyway, yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I was going to say, Danny, do you agree with me? Like, looking at if we're to think the second apron is a proverbial hard cap, most teams will operate as a hard cap. Players like Clay and Draymond are the ones who are more likely to get squeezed, so to say, relative to the previous CBA. And I don't even know how much that matters because I don't know how big their market would have been under the old structure. Like, is it maybe a little overblown to think that this has a massive impact on them?
For the Warriors,
contrarian Sam.
For the Warriors, mostly yes. Because, I mean, here's the thing, though. players who've been on championship teams who've been good, they generally have a market, even if some people don't evaluate that they're that guy anymore. That's the way this generally works. Like you see aging
There's
players.
always one team.
Yeah, there's always one or two teams, and like I mean, with Draymond, who gets out of the woodwork is going to be really interesting. Like, not only who can pay him, but who wants to do that. And Draymond's a wonderful player. Like I brought up the idea, my favorite hypo with Draymond, if it's not going to be on the Warriors, is the Spurs. You bring him in, have him play next to Wembanyama. Does Pop want that? Does Draymond want that?
I think that's a great fit, actually. I think that'd be a great fit.
And I mean, the smartest defensive player of this era, mentoring beyond all the other mentors that Wembanyama has. But do the Spurs want that? Does Draymond? And because the big challenge,
the Spurs would. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. And the other big challenge with all of that is it's not only do they want him, it's do they want him the most. And so for all of these different situations, I mean, I don't think the Lakers are irrelevant because they're relevant, but like, do they want
because
him
he
over
podcasts
Kyrie?
about LeBron every week?
Do they want him over anything else? And so the problem for Draymond is they have to want you most. And there could be teams, there are always teams that could make their way out. But that's why Clay's really interesting, is because while he might not be, I mean, I hope he has a great year, just like hope everybody does, and that he can bounce back, but his basic skill set helps almost everybody. But is there a team that thinks, oh, he's going to be a star into his mid-30s because he's such a great shooter? And we'll have to see. I don't think basically to me, if I were in a TBD general manager's shoes, I would be saying, if you want to take, like solid starter money, like 15 to 18 million, 20 million, like maybe we can talk. But if you want more than that, that's your prerogative. You can do that. We'll just have our conversation in June of next year rather than June of right now.
They get dicey for the Warriors. I'm trying to. I mean,
all of this now is dicey for the Warriors.
Let's take a step off the CBA. Like, what do you make of the fact that they haven't named a successor to Bob Myers yet? Like, part of me is like, it's the NBA Finals. They're not under some sort of like gun to make a public press conference. But the other part of me is like, it's been a couple weeks. They're just kind of hanging out there.
It's definitely notable because usually,
Sure.
I mean, I'm assuming Myers told the Warriors at some point ahead, at least where he was thinking about it. And
I'm assuming the Woj bomb wasn't the first they heard of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so my key question is how desirable of a job is this? Because you have an owner who likes to get involved in the process, who is willing to spend, and Lacob has a lot of positives as an owner, and many positives that other owners don't have. But you think about this like from an intellectual standpoint. Well, the primary thing that you're doing is you're having these awkward, tense negotiations with players who have deep value and history with your franchise, but may have different value as players. And a big part of what you're going to be doing is not only saying goodbye to people that are important to the franchise, but also telling them goodbye while some others are staying, and the awkwardness of that, and how do you convey this with Stephen Curry and everyone else? And so, like, that's a part of, I've been saying for a long time that and with no inside information, that I thought Myers was going to leave, but not necessarily leave for another job, because this next part isn't going to be fun. And so do you, like, is that a sales pitch? Like, Michael Winger took the DC job. You can make an argument that if your goal is to put an imprint on the team, that the Wizards, even though they're way worse and they're worse owned, that you can do something there. Whereas the Warriors, it's mostly just basically battling attrition as best you can. And
being bad cop.
Yeah, being bad cop and trying to trying to nudge the owner to spend money, but also being like, oh, that might not be my job, because remember, Lacob is hiring this person. So he can put some, he can say like, these are the constraints I'm going to put on you, which would have been different for Bob.
But it also depends. Is Lacob hiring a yes man person? Is he hiring an external, which is unlikely? I think we all agree that it's not going to be an external person. You look like you're about to say something, Danny.
Well, I mean, the other part of it is, and this is always challenging because we don't get this stuff publicly, is it's also about who's in the room and who's making the decisions. So who's negotiating the contracts, who's making the decisions. And a lot of these big ones are actually ownership level decisions, and that's fine. Like, that's when you pay whatever billions for a team, like that, you can defer that to other people. And I think generally that leads to better basketball outcomes, but you have the right to do what you want with that, and for better and for worse. And for some teams that's for better, for some it's for worse. And so I think that that's another part of the challenge here, is that some owners are very hands-off, some owners are very hands-on, and that can also change in time, which is another different dynamic. And so maybe somebody's interested
Yeah,
in
you
that.
think
And
that'll
brought-
change with Joey? Daniel, you think that'll change with Joey?
No,
Huh?
I don't. I don't think that will with him. I don't think that will with Ballmer and a few others. And so
Sure.
I think that it's a different kind of job. And I'm sure there are only 30 lead decision maker jobs, and there are people who would do terrible things for any of those 30 as a practical consideration. But are you going to get the best of the best? Probably not. But there's also not that much evidence outside of a few general managers that they're like of who is great and who will be. Like most of the best GMs don't change jobs that often for a good reason, because they stay where they are, they get more equity, all that fun stuff.
Let's stick on this one. Do you think the Warriors are actually going to pivot hard this season, or do you think they're going to, I don't want to say kick the tires, but like kind of like see if they can retool and make another push at it? Because they obviously won a title 2 years ago. This year was frustrating. It looks like it's moving the other way, even though it was with the same cast. Like they could go either direction with it.
I think they're going to make another push. And I think the reason for that is, again, I brought up the 18 months idea, that they can largely, like this team would be expensive, but not hilariously so. It would be, by normal standards, but Chase Center, if it's full up, they'll be okay. And then you have this evaluation point, which you can either say is January, February, the trade deadline, or is next offseason, where then you see where did it go. And the other big part of it is you think about, well, what would a teardown look like? And Jordan Poole just had a rough season relative to expectations. Klay Thompson just had a weird season relative to expectations. So a teardown, unless you're doing something like involving Wiggins or Curry, which I wouldn't expect, then you're not really getting a ton for it, and you're not going to be bad enough. Like if you have Steph Curry on your team, unless you get into a circumstance where it happens organically, like 2019, that sort of a situation where like your best players get hurt.
Yeah.
So what I think they're going to do is they start the season, intend to run it back, make it, maybe it will be a little bit more overtly last dancey. It's possible. And then if it works, great. You would presumably in that case have everybody but Klay under contract. Then, assuming Poole doesn't have a worse year, you could probably do something with him, even if it's move him for a different type of guy or something else. You do that. Or then you have Draymond under contract. Maybe he even opted in, and so you can do it that way. But I think part of what the Warriors, what would interest them about that is you give them a chance. You fill the arena, and then they could get out relatively clean a year from now if they wanted to. And so and then if you need to do it, then you avoid the worst of the stuff of the mega tax or whatever we're going to call it. We don't have a shorthand yet. You avoid a lot of that stuff. And so, yeah, you have an expensive year, but you have an expensive year where you have one of the best players in the world. You have a really strong foundation. And the other part is that it's not 100% their choice because Draymond is a part of this. But to me, the fact that most of the teams with cap space, if not all of them, aren't really like competitors with or without Draymond, means that if he values that, he probably wants to re-sign. And so in that circumstance, then you can, I'd say you could squeeze him too hard, but like you try to get him at a number that he's happy with, but that it's either in terms of years or in terms of money that if something happens, you could eventually go in a different direction.
They've done that a few times with him. It always feels like where this contract is like pretty.
It's always him and Andre.
Yeah, it's like
and
pretty.
Wiggins signed a very reasonable extension.
Although that one felt like Wiggins did that more on his own volition rather than like he probably could have waited and.
I don't mean that as a criticism for the off court stuff. I mean,
I definitely thought that's what you meant. So,
no, like I meant like so there are rumors about his negotiation of the extension with Glenn Taylor back in the Minnesota days was very much I'm going to try hard. It's going to work out great, and it worked out great. Just not for them.
Yeah. Well, it was like, but you're right. I mean, they could get out of Klay's. Obviously, it's gone, vanished, poof. 44 million, right, gone. It does feel a little crazy if they go into the season with Draymond opting in as a last year. Does feel kind of crazy.
Klay, a lame duck, like just kind of none of those guys having their future.
Little shocker. It would be shocking.
But Draymond, it could be on a 3 or 4 year deal. Like that's a possibility.
I think it's likely.
I don't think it that. And the nice part for Draymond about negotiating that, I mean, obviously this is what agents do, is that he can have an idea of what the Warriors are thinking on a multi-year deal before he makes the option decision. Like these things are all going to be connected. And also, what offers he has from the teams?
Would be great if he had an exec
but
to
that's,
talk to him about that. But.
Yeah. So the basic information is going to be known by that point. And you might not be sure what Kyrie's doing, what Chris Middleton's doing, all these other guys, but you have a pretty good idea of what's on the table.
So
now it feels like to me, final thing I'm gonna say. Now it feels like to me is the likely scenario, Danny, for what you're saying. If I'm combining what you're saying with what Sam's saying, it's they'll do a Draymond 3-year, opt out and extend. They'll keep Poole, they'll run it back for a last dance, but then next year they'll decide if it's a Clay extension or trade Poole, and hope Poole's trade value is going to go up because he's going to be better than last year, you would assume, so that now you can move that contract. And you either pay one or the other, Clay or Poole, but you're not going to do both. Is what feels like is likely.
It feels like that. And the other part of it is the Poole conversation. So basically, it's been hard to trade him for the last year, not only because of the play, but because of the way it's called a poison pill provision. It's an outdated thing in the CBA. Now they can be, I would say, for at least the short term, it's listening on Poole. And if somebody really likes him, let's say there's a team it doesn't have to be in June. It could be in January of next year. It could be at February, like right at the deadline, or it could be next June or July. Like you can see if somebody really likes what he's bringing to the table. And there are always teams, even though I think they're generally overrated in the league right now, guys who can score and distribute a little bit. Like there are teams that always need those types of players, and you only need one or two to be interested in order to maybe reshuffle things a little bit to get somebody who makes more sense with what they want to do, either financially, play style, or both.
So piggybacking on that, you think the most likely scenario for this team is they're running back most of the same guys, most of the same young guys, and just that's kind of the roster next year, hoping a year removed from the punch and, a little humility from kind of what would be a disappointing season gets them playing more at the level they did a year ago.
It's also a year of development. I mean, it's been such a weird time. I'm sure. I know you guys have talked about this a lot for the young guys. Like, does Kerr actually give Moody more latitude, Kuminga? And maybe there will be, and this hasn't, from what I understand, and I'm not super connected at this point in terms of this part of it, like, maybe a little bit more from Lakeup to Kerr in terms of like, hey man, like these guys are knowing what we have in these players is important. Like we're going to be competitive, we're going to be good, but like Kuminga, maybe it's you try to push whether it's Dunleavy or whoever else to maybe you don't fill these extra little spots with guys that Kerr can trust more than Kuminga, and you do that like it's the.
I mean, he'll find an Anthony Lamb. Don't worry.
To show my age a little bit, it's like the let AC Law go so that he won't get overplayed, and like. Sometimes you have to do that. And the other part is like these young guys should be getting better. And the Warriors aren't asking for them to set the world on fire. Like that's the beautiful thing about playing with Stephen Curry is you're not usually having to do that. And so if they can get, if those guys can step into 20-minute a game roles, even if it's just in the regular season, like that makes a difference. And so you want to see that. And I mean, 2 timelines is its own thing, but the idea that these guys should be helping you by their 3rd year is a real thing.
I mean, it is in theory. So I don't know. Where's your optimism level with it? Like, let's take off. You're painting a very fair picture, letting people kind of interpret it the way they want. Take that hat off. Where are you with that as a picture for the Warriors next year? Are you feeling optimistic, pessimistic? You're somewhere in the middle?
I think that's a dangerous team in the West if they can come into the offseason healthy or into the postseason healthy. Sorry, apologies. Because they're a solid defensive team, if not a very good one, depending on how some of these other pieces fit in. And they have Stephen Curry, and they have shooting around that. And so I'm not sure that it would like pick them to come out of the West. I think you would need to see a lot from the other teams. And Denver is going on this big run, and everyone else that's healthy or not healthy, and everything like that. But that's a team that's good enough to make some noise. And to me, that's the threshold for you to get there. And the other part of it, I brought this up earlier, is I would be encouraged by that in part because I don't think the teardown idea gets you very far. Because Steph Curry's still a really good player, and being a fringy playoff team, is the most boring place in the NBA to be for me.
Yeah.
But also, it doesn't get you the pieces that you need to eventually reach the heights. Like that's just, unless you're drafting Giannis 15th, like you're not really going to get there that way. And so we see teams, I've criticized the Bulls over the years and everything else. And I'm not saying they should do anything with Curry because he has the right to, I think Curry has earned the ability to be wherever he wants, whenever he wants for the rest of his career. Like, and that's rare for me.
What about going the other way? What about like, all right, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, draft picks, although they're limited because they can trade the 2023, but then they can't touch anything till 26. And now you're talking about when Steph's 38, which is dangerous in its own way. Jordan Poole, that sort of thing. What about like cobbling that together to go the other way?
I think it's worth talking to teams about that. The problem is, who is that player that does everything else? And so presumably in that scenario, like if Draymond leaves, then that scenario doesn't really matter because you're not going to get to that level. Sure. So then we're talking about a player who makes sense with Steph, Clay, Draymond, and presumably Wiggins, because I don't think you want to include him in the trade. And so is there a player who can shoot well enough, because you need another shooter if Draymond's on the floor, who can at least defend one or two positions, and like that type of player that you can get for those sorts of resources? Then yeah, I mean, I think you consider it, and you could potentially even do that in season. The challenge is there aren't that many, because that player's probably going to be wing sized. You don't want somebody who's 6'2". You don't want somebody who's like 7'3", unless they're really, really, really good.
LeBron's like 6'10".
Yeah, LeBron. If LeBron is interested, then you could of course have that conversation. You can have the little clutch reunion a little north than some.
I take that back.
Or they could trade for Kyrie.
Speaking of point guards, you see this Chris Paul stuff?
Anything, just the general.
General.
Yeah,
bullshit.
I mean, well, just the cliff notes on that. I think what's happening is the Suns are trying to see if they can do better with like 12 million than Chris Paul, and the answer might be yes. I mean, he's very rarely healthy in the postseason. He wasn't the same guy this past year, and where he fits with Durant and Booker is a little bit weird. It's surprising how quickly this has turned, but yeah, I'm not saying he would be the perfect fit, but I think he's going to be looking, because the financial differences for Paul are actually, if this happens, if he gets, whether it's stretched or just gets, they just straight up cut him, because of the set off, the amount of money that he additionally makes by getting a lot more than the minimum isn't that big a deal. So he's going to be looking at some options around. Then there's been more buzz about the Southern California teams, but the Northern California teams can use guards too.
Are you telling me that, like, it doesn't, like, coming off, let's say he gets waived, which I think is the likeliest scenario for him, it doesn't really matter how much money he would actually, let me kind of break it all the way down.
Well,
he could sign for a vet. He'd be okay with a vet min.
I think it's possible, because I don't have the firm set off numbers, but let's say it's about 2/3. So remember, his minimum's real high because he's been in the league forever, and his the difference between his minimum and the taxpayer mid-level, which is $5 million for next year, in terms of his take-home, is not that big. And so does he really want to take 10 teams off the board because I want this $1 million? Right. I don't know. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. It's within his rights. You can go for whatever you want, but you open up everyone if you're willing to take something like that. And I mean, the other part of it is like, but is he willing to do that? Is he trying to play the Suns here to try to give him a little bit more? Because the Suns could cut him but not waive him and actually sign him. They can't. There's some limitations there, but they could do something. So we'll see. But I love it.
I love it.
I mean, the chaos. I mean, the chaos of all these.
I need it.
All these point guards who have such a long history and just have enough baggage to fill whatever airport you want, just bouncing around between contending teams. Him and Westbrook, they should do interviews side by side and see who gets the job. It's gonna be amazing.
Look, man, if the Warriors aren't gonna contend for a championship, at least make me and Sam's job exciting. You know what I mean? So get CP3 on this team. Come on, what are we doing here?
Make Slater's job exciting too.
Yeah. Where is he anyway? Does he still tweet? Does he still work? Come on, Slater, what are we doing? Silence.
I think he's taking a little time.
Yeah, let him lose life.
He's not covering the Lakers in the bubble, so.
I wanted to ask you. So we got I don't want to say we got sidetracked because we're talking about the Warriors. Help settle this one. Andy and I have been going back and forth on the new CBA, And obviously everything is, first off, they haven't even ratified it, have they?
Correct. Or at least, I think the formal, I will say the text doesn't exist in a public, like even in a form
Everything's
that
leaks,
I've
right?
heard is there. So like,
Yeah.
they have about 2 weeks. Let's see when it happens. But anyway, let's go.
My general perspective on, based off of what's publicly come out, is I think it's kind of good for the players. I don't think it's nearly as bad as the way it's being framed. And I think Andy disagrees with me. I think he thinks it kind of screws a certain class of players over. So I'm gonna let you be the arbiter on this one, because I'm looking at it. I'm seeing they still get 50% of BRI. So come hell or high water, players as a total will make the same amount of money, right? Whatever it is, that money's gonna get cut to them. It's just gonna put them in a position where they're gonna have to legitimately choose between, like, do I want to stay on this team at a discount, or do I want to move markets? Maybe go to Indiana, maybe go to Charlotte or somewhere I didn't want to make every last dollar. And I don't actually think that's bad for the league in general. I think it's better for the league to encourage kind of like smart management in that sense.
I think it's worse for people who care about great teams, whether that's because you're a partisan or because that you're a fan of the league and that's what you want, because it's going to be hard for teams. Even like, you could think about it in the like equitable, oh, you drafted all these guys. Like for Boston, for example, like it's going to be hard for them to keep all the players. Denver, most of their key players they drafted themselves. So in terms of the players, I generally agree with you, Sam. I think that the net is pretty even. Players are going to have to sacrifice financially to be on good teams. And but the thing that I don't like about it is it's harder to get there. And so that's not really, like with the lack of ability to trade for guys and everything else, like you're just closing a lot of doors. And whether that matters or not, I mean, that's hard to say, but we're going to but you can so you could, so if you want to make your 20 million, you might be going to, I mean, it's hard to say San Antonio because they could be really good in a couple of years.
Yeah, they might turn the
corner.
You're
going to San Antonio. You're going to Detroit. You're not getting that 20 million from the Clippers. And if that's what you want, if that's not what you want, you have that. And the other thing that's really potentially notable is, I mean, they fixed one thing that I hate about the old CBA while creating a whole bunch of new things I hate, which is standard, is it's less of a big deal to be a little bit in the tax now. And so I think we're going to see some teams spend more than they had before, and then also the new salary floor. So like maybe for a lower level playoff team, maybe they're spending extra, they're using the non-tax pyramid level. They're spending that 10 million. And so those teams could be getting a little bit better, but the most expensive teams are getting a little bit worse. So, there are winners and losers in that, whether you think for me, the big losers though are people who like the best teams because it's going to be harder for them to stay together. And
I can't decide as a consumer, and we'll find this out obviously in the next 10 years. Is it going to be more fun to watch a team that's a 3-time champion in 5 years versus next year we're going to get the Phoenix Suns versus the Milwaukee Bucks, and then the next year after that we're going to get the Clippers versus the Chicago Bulls or something, right? Like every year it's kind of like the NFL. Well,
that's clearly what they want. Am I wrong for saying that they want to be like the NFL, where it's like we sucked, but next year we could be back in the.
We're in the playoffs. We're in the NFC title game, right? Something like that.
It's so weird because you think about basketball has often been built about the individual, and so you can think about LeBron and everything else. Like it will be harder for the next generation's LeBron to make the finals every year. And so sometimes you build those rivalries, you build those legacies through not just one run, but through consistent runs. And so I think you'll be, you could think about it in terms of like Hollywood, you'll be building fewer megastars, but you'll be building more like substars. And that's fine. I mean, it's just a different thing. But you think about part of the reason that the Warriors were this galvanizing force around sports is because they made it so many times in a row. Yeah. And that they had this history and they didn't necessarily have a consistent West rival. They had the Rockets for a time, but then everything else. But they had
LeBron.
They had the Cavs, they had LeBron. And so we'll see less of that. And so that's different. It's weird, but the opportunity for all of these there's so many great players around the league to get shine. Like, Jokic is going to looks pretty likely to win a championship this year. That's fantastic. Giannis has had his chance recently. We'll see who that is in future years. Like, so those conversations are going to be different. And
It's not going to be
again,
James Harden. That's all I know.
Hey, maybe James Harden goes. It's so interesting because Jokic, and they're gonna win this championship. They're gonna win this tomorrow, Monday night, or Wednesday, or whatever.
Wouldn't it be so amazing if Jimmy and the Heat just put it together now and just like that?
How?
I
they're
know,
like a
but
mid-major 8 seed. It's how they're playing. You know what I mean?
It really
anyway,
is. George,
I didn't mean to
George
sidetrack
Mason,
you, but let's go.
It's George Mason. I just love Jokic. Sam has been on this show talking. I've loved Jokic for years. The Embiid stuff I thought was always pure bullshit. His personality is just, how are you marketed? It's so boring. It's the thing about Steph and his play style. Now, Steph's personality is boring too, but the play style is incredible. So the fact that you can go to it back-to-back years, finals, you can sell that, right? Same with LeBron, obviously. With Jokic, it feels like a little, and then same with Giannis. And Giannis was someone that never felt like he got way off the map, way on the map, right? Even though he won that championship, it never felt like he was going to be that face of the league. So if you're going to keep flipping that every single year, it's Jokic and then Giannis and then who's next year. Like, it's just, I don't know. I actually don't know. I just think it's interesting that Adam Silver decided to, I don't know, Grant Williams and CJ McCollum and the owners decided to
under Adam's guidance in hand. Yes.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting. The finals have been fun to watch, but I think this is interesting where they're going.
We'll get you out on this one, Danny. I want your pure, unadulterated opinion on this one.
Uh-oh.
All right, you're Joe Lacob, you're Mike Dunleavy, you're both of them. What are you doing? What is your thought for this offseason? I think you've kind of already given it, but let's just get the 30-second take right now.
You at least give a fair offer to Draymond, something in probably the 20 to 25 million range. And you say, honestly, I would say to him, 3 years or fewer, however many years you want. If you want 2, if you want 1, if you want 3, we can do it. 4, maybe we'll do some protections. Maybe we'll reduce the annual value there. You talked to Clay about an extension. I already said 15 to 18. If he wants more than that, more power to him. Not going to happen. If it's higher than that. And I don't know what in the world Clay wants. So we'll see there. And then you run it, you try your best to run it back. And if one or more of those players say no, then you reevaluate and you see what you can do. And then for the Warriors, probably the hard thing is they probably can't make that decision at the trade deadline unless there's an injury you have to go through next year, but that's worth it. You see where this team is, you go through it, you draft the best player you can or make a trade. But the other part of it, and this is what good general managers do, you're listening on everything else. I think that the only thing that's set in stone, as long as he doesn't want anything else to happen, is Steph Curry. And you listen on everything. And if there's, a player, the OG Anunoby, the Jaylen Brown, the whoever, that is worth that bounty that you have to do it, well, then you talk about it. But you assume that you're not going to, because that's a lot to ask. It's a lot to, those deals don't happen very often for a reason. And there would be, if I were running the team, there'd be a group of players that I would be having those conversations about. It's a pretty narrow group, but it exists. And then you presume all of them are going to laugh and hang up, and then you just walk away, or they're going to say, "Oh, we want all 4 of your first round picks or whatever you could trade." And so then you laugh and hang up. That's the way it generally goes. And then that team, like, if they can make it into the postseason healthy, they're competitive, they're interesting. They could win any series. Maybe if they're slightly more consistent, they won't have a chance to lose every series. Who knows? We'll see. And that actually, the funniest thing about it, that's actually for a team that has been a dynasty, that would be a better way to kind of go through this end than most of them are lucky enough to have. Like, most of
That's
these
true.
end really badly. They end really acrimoniously. And, maybe we'll see the Warriors equivalent of Andrew Bynum checking JJ Barea. Who knows? Maybe we'll see that in the postseason.
We might already saw it with Draymond.
We might have.
Pull out. Yeah, but
we might have. But that, I think you see that, and there's a chance that everything goes awesome, and that the Warriors can run it for another year or two beyond that. I think outside of that, we're kind of defying every age-related precedent that exists, and maybe you can find it a different way. But the Warriors, it's so funny because you think back to 2016 and the CBA that followed that. The story of the collective bargaining agreement is that they pull up the ladder behind everyone else. And so both in that CBA and this one, the Warriors benefited a little bit from being already on the boat, not being the ladder being pulled up didn't affect them as much. It makes it harder for other teams to catch them. And so they're, you're always trying to catch the rabbit, catch the dragon, whatever analogy you want to use. And so the Warriors are actually in a pretty good spot, and it's not going to be good forever, but it's already been an amazing run.
All right, Danny, appreciate you. What do you want to plug before we get out of here?
Dunked on Prime. Do that with Nate Duncan. Podcasts, 5+ a week. We're doing draft work. We're doing game analysis. We're doing draft. Yeah, we're doing offseason previews for all 30 teams. The mock off season there. Writing at The Athletic. Doing a lot of collaborative stuff. Have things in the works there. And then Real GM Radio, weekly podcast I do on my own. That's interview style with lots of different people. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Appreciate you, Danny. Have a great evening.